I don't know what this is either, but it's a fun intro. Nona the Ninth, the third book in the Locked Tomb now quadrilogy, I believe, has officially been released. And I was really excited to get this one because along with Age of Madness, Poppy War, Greenbone Saga, the Locked Tomb series has kind of been one of those really interesting foundational to the channel series we started reading and reviewing here all the way back in the day. And on top of that, it's a series that's known for having a really interesting flavor and different style to it that makes it stand out even in the renaissance of fantasy we're in, where so much of the genre is coming across as developing, pulling from new cultures, and that's just impressive to me. What I was really looking for though here in Nona the Ninth was a slight bit of refining of that flavor. Tamsin Muir as an author is someone who brings so much to the table, and there's been some bold choices that have paid off to varying degrees for this series specifically in terms of especially the authorial voice, and it made me really excited to see what exactly that voice was going to turn into for Nona the Ninth. Gideon the Ninth was known as having a very particular style. Harrow the Ninth, with it being in a POV that is different than the first book, a lot of people I saw complained about how they had a difficult time reading it. Nona the Ninth does somewhat feel like a reaction to that, in that it is the most readable book in this series by a wide margin. But what Tamsin Muir did, and I find so impressive, is while it is definitely the most readable, I don't think it's lost much for sacrificing that, because she has improved as an author, and that stylization, while it's been toned down, its refinement has also meant it's still absolutely present. Though I still think there's going to be a slim portion of the Locked Tomb fanbase who does not like the fact that this seems like it's trying to adjust to be easier to consume for a wider audience in the third book. How Tamsin Muir has grown as an author, and not just how she paints and immerses the reader in a scene, but also brings characterization to the table, means you're still getting this bold, popping series, but it just feels like it's in a more mature hand. It's been a fun ride from the beginning, but where occasionally the turns and whips might be a bit too hard, the overall experience is just smoother. And nowhere is that more apparent than the characterization. Don't get me wrong, I loved Gideon from the beginning. I think the characters within the Locked Tomb have been sensational, but occasionally the characterization the reader is supposed to swallow down was a bit just too blunt. Now that characterization is keeping its powerful punch, but it feels more appropriately woven into the narrative and the world as a whole. And the world itself continues to grow and thrive and be as visceral as it has ever been. But whenever a new book is added to a series and you go from trilogy to quadrilogy or what have you for various reasons, I always get a little bit concerned when it comes to the finer details with like character growth, because if you are planning on a character to have a certain revelation in book 3 and that book 3 is now book 4, what's that character going to be doing for book 3? How are they going to keep me engaged as a reader? All of that was clearly thought about and addressed by the author. Not only are returning characters continuing to have dynamic elements to them from beginning to end, their relationships are thriving throughout this narrative, and even the new characters that are brought in for Nona the Ninth are now ranking among some of my top for the Locked Tomb. I do have some criticisms here, but they're largely the criticisms I've had for the Locked Tomb as a whole. The amount of stylization brought into this story can be overwhelming for me personally. It's just not entirely my taste, though I can see why some people are going to continue to really like it. I do want to clarify though, what I'm saying isn't that there was style over substance, just that there was such an abundance of style in moments that also had plenty of substance, that the flavor of it, as I'm continuing to call it, became kind of overwhelming to my palate. Though I don't want to say, Pips, your tail is in, it's like you're placing it intentionally. You get what I'm saying. That is more than made up for though by a really consistent tone, which has always been one of the strengths of this series, and the structure being surprisingly great for an added book as well. More and more, the deeper into reviewing books I get, what I start appreciating isn't necessarily what I loved before, which is how immersed I feel in a book, but I start appreciating a book that actually understands the structure it requires. And I actually have a suspicion, completely a theory, that's why this series is now 4 books, because a lot of the things that happen in Nona the Ninth need to happen for this series, and yet having all of this plus whatever's going to happen in the next book in one, I think would be really jarring for the reader. You'd be going from a pretty quick, fast-paced book to suddenly a tomb slammed down at the end, and I don't really like when series do that. So it seems like this has been the smarter decision from beginning to end, instead of having new forced narratives pushed in to keep a successful series going. It just feels like a proper decision to split up a book has been made, and now the series has a consistent flow throughout. Assuming the last book isn't some gargantuan thing still at the end here. Again, total conjecture. Now, when it comes to the actual narrative, the meat of what we're getting here, not just the bones, I found myself immensely satisfied by what Nona the Ninth is bringing to the table, sticking with Timson Muir's style of giving fans a story that obviously, with all this flavor and spice and panache, is exactly what they want. She still continues to follow it up with some pretty severe emotional slaps. And I think that kind of emotional abuse is what Locked Tomb fans are looking for. A lot of laughs, a lot of love, and then hurting you with that love. And there's also a great weight consistently to Nona the Ninth that I found somewhat lacking, especially in Harrow, that is elevating this book in terms of the stakes for me, so that I as a reader am kind of just feeling on edge in a way that even for Gideon, I didn't feel as much. And yeah, it's easier for a later book in a series to do that after a lot of the threats have been established, but there's a delicateness to the emotional and physical stakes to this journey and how the reader is constantly reminded to them that made this a damn near thrill ride. And when it comes to the ideas and themes in the series, I don't think it's a spoiler to say, yes, a story that is heavily involved and steeped in necromancy has ideas and observations around death. The way the people, the way the characters themselves view death, how it impacts them, and how that is changing and growing over the series might be the most interesting part of the Locked Tomb for me. I also have a little bit of a complaint with a side storyline that's paralleling the main one within this book that does so much for explaining the world, giving the reader answers for some much more like broader things happening within the environment as a whole, but I wasn't nearly as tantalized by that. Fortunately, a lot more of the page count is towards that main story. I think on reread though, I'll be much more interested into that kind of providing answers side of things, because after Nona the Ninth was said and done, I put it down, I went, wow, I feel so satisfied with characters and development and arcs and narrative. I really want to know even more about the world though. So I feel like the biggest reread appeal for me here is going to be the answers for the wider world. The cast of characters is going to be hooking you, from the big players to the smaller ones reacting to the bigger moves. There's tons of moments that we as fantasy fans love that make us throw the books across the room and then run after it to go pick it up and see the results of the thing that just made us throw it across the room. It's going to have those moments you've been craving, and I don't see how anyone who's been a fan of Locked Tomb up until this point can't not enjoy where Nona the Ninth goes to. Overall, I'm feeling a very solid 8 out of 10, and like and subscribe if you have not already. Hit the Patreon if you want to support what I do here, and have a good one, y'all. Peace. Books, merch, all that stuff. Peace.